Welcome to Within You, a place where we explore the liminal space between as you navigate between now and what's next. I'm Vivian Carrasco, a wisdom teacher and mindset mentor based in Fort Worth, Texas. And today, my host is Alexandra Kalino. She is the host of the What If podcast. Hi, Alexandra.
Hello.
I'm so excited to be talking to you.
This is pretty cool, I have to say. I didn't expect this, so I'm really excited.
Yeah. So to give everyone an insight on what just happened between us, you just interviewed me for your podcast, the What If podcast, and we've turned the tables and now I'm interviewing you for Within You.
Mm-hmm. And you were my first. And I think I screwed everything up.
You did not. There's no way to screw this up at all. You either learn or you do it. That's a good way for us to kind of start. This idea that we're screwing something up. This movement towards perfection from the get-go. How can we develop, this is just a general solve the world problem question. How can we allow ourselves to develop mastery as we're getting somewhere? Kind of like we did as kids. We crawled before we walked and we walked before we ran. Why don't we do that as we're living?
That's a good question, especially since I'm constantly harping on at work about how repetition is mastery and how if we do the same thing over and over and perfect it over time, that's really when we become who we want to be and expand our capacity for everything. So it's funny how I'm really hard on myself, and yet it's the multiple failings or iterations or doing things over and over in a different way that finally gets me to the sweet spot.
So you said that you're that way at work, but you're not that way with your own projects. Why do you think that is?
For me, I grew up in a really controlled environment, and I think I just made my own habit of being harder on me than anyone else around me. And so I always felt as though I didn't necessarily have the knowledge that my parents possessed, or in particular, my dad. And if I didn't have that, what I could have was the ability to work hard. And so for me, it was about achieving perfection through hard work. And so I was really hard on myself if I couldn't master whatever it is that was right in front of me that potentially came a lot easier for other people. And so that was just a habit that I picked up along the way. It's one that's been more difficult to shed than other ones.
So you're currently shedding it?
The being so hard on myself? Yeah.
Yeah. The belief that you're achieving perfection through hard work.
Yeah. And that too.
And that too. Add that one to the basket.
Yep.
So if I were to ask you, who is the person that you want to become right now? How would you describe that, Alexandra?
Someone who doesn't effort and someone who just is really sure and satisfied all the time, but who doesn't necessarily need to know the answer to everything.
What are the steps that you're taking to get there?
Well, it's not really, something that I produced myself. It kind of happened to me. But through a situation, I found that, with my situation in particular, it was more about if I kept controlling others or every single situation around me, I was not happy. And I was letting other people's behavior or outcomes really influence how I felt. And because I became increasingly unhappier, I realized that I needed to stop allowing other people to have that effect. So I began meditating a lot more to be able to have that. For me, meditation is more like that space between creation and reaction. And so if I don't take that time to meditate, I'm more in my reactive phase rather than my creative phase. And journaling, I find that getting everything out on paper really helps me to unpack what's going on and to realize that things aren't as bad as they seem. And really, it's one of those things where it's I constantly have to ask myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? Losing my job, losing my home, having to move to a different country, someone not seeing me the way I want them to see me. And then looking at those outcomes and seeing, one, is that even a real outcome, or is that just anxiety that's based in something that isn't real? But it's been a lot of self-work, and I guess a lot of it alone, and not necessarily being more trusting of the universe I still feel like I need to do things. One of the things for me too is my body has become very sensitive this year. And I can tell that if I'm not going into more of my feminine energy before I go into my masculine energy, everything gets screwed up. And I can feel it in my body when certain more female parts just are like sore, or the left side of my body is sore or hurts. And in that case, I know I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's kind of that nudge for me to go back into that place and just accept that everything is happening as it happens and not to have to control it.
That's interesting. So your liminal space between now and what's next, you're moving through this, shifting the belief that your perfection will come through really hard work. And when you don't follow it, and tell me where I'm wrong, then your body tells you, like you've noticed like the sensitivity in your body over the last year, like it informing you of you needing to shift back. Is that what I heard? Give me an example of that, like a practical example.
So when I'm at work and I am racing against various deadlines and I'm overwhelmed and, I know that I need to be doing all of these things, my body will actually produce brain fog. And I will be staring at my screen and I won't be able to read the page. And I will actually need to go get up and go for a walk in nature, not just outside, but actually be with trees and things around me, that nurturing environment for me to lift the brain fog and then be able to concentrate again. So my body actually physically shuts down and tells me to stop. And that's been really difficult because when you're in this mindset of, I have these deadlines and I need to show up for someone, but my body is physically saying no, you just need to trust that you're going to be able to get it done in that shorter time space and still achieve the goals or what the goals need to be based on other people.
That is so fascinating. Fascinating because you're literally in the experience of this in the moment and learning to trust it. And I can't quote the research by name, but this is a common practice of creatives, is to step away into and then move into something else, anything else. For you, it's like walking and being in nature, like to nurture you. For someone, it could be like a shower or, jumping rope. I just made that up. But anything that then sort of allows that creativity that you have to do that won't happen while you're staring at the screen.
It's true. And I think what's been so fascinating is, going back to the whole habit conversation, is you've been doing one thing for your entire life and you're almost being asked to do the exact opposite and see what that result produces for you. And by doing the exact opposite, I've been able to, focus in a shorter amount of time or have those insights that I really did need to produce a better piece of work instead of just churning out what I need to do every day.
So it's giving you the evidence you need in order to trust it, but you don't trust it yet.
Yeah, that's the piece where I feel like I'll be abandoned.
Say more.
I think as a kid, I felt really loved by my parents, but because I was constantly asked to achieve and to achieve more and had that constant pressure on me, I felt very alone. And if I didn't achieve a specific level of what someone else expected of me, I was kind of left to my own devices and my own circumstances, really. And so I think that that's kind of played out more in my adult life subconsciously. And that's why I keep returning to that need to be perfect.
And now your body's helping you to step back and learn a different way of being. But it makes you angry, you said?
It can be frustrating. Yeah. I think my body has always been telling me exactly what I need to do. I just haven't been aware of it. So just as an example, when I was a teenager, I had very chronic acne. So my skin was obviously trying to tell me something. I was also, maybe this is TMI, but I was really constipated all the time. And, there was a point in my early 20s where I thought I had colon cancer and all this stuff wrong. And, I would go to see specialists and nothing was ever wrong with me. And so my body has been showing me these different things for a while. I just haven't really known how to listen to it or what it's saying to me. And so I never really knew what it meant to be fully in tune with my body. And so I'm really grateful that now I can look at it and know what my swollen eye means and know that when I have acne on my neck or something, it's because I'm not speaking enough or different things like that. And that's been really helpful. But there are moments where you're like, this should not be happening right now. And I had to basically turn vegan quite recently because my body just went on complete shutdown mode. And I'm someone who loves food and I traveled just for food. So that was a really interesting shift.
So it sounds like it's both frustrating, but you also appreciate the process of how your body is nudging you and shifting you into different directions. And you might not like really love all the changes, but you recognize that it's informing you, like it's bringing you into like a new way of being.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you begin to recognize? And you said that now you kind of know what your body's trying to tell you. How is it that you learned what these signs mean?
I read How to Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. And she has that index of, this is this symptom and what does it mean in your life? And then she gives you affirmations for how to make it better. And I don't know that I specifically bought into it because, some of them are like, if you have a bruise, I think it means you hate a little part of yourself or something like that. And it's really difficult to identify sometimes. But for, I think, the beginning of this year, for 3 months, I had swollen eyes every single day. And not only were they swollen, but they were red. And it was like I had eczema around my eyes. And I had never had this issue ever. And it was constant. And one day, so then I picked up this book. And I looked at myself in the mirror because basically I put together that swollen eyes and eczema mean that I'm not valuing my self-worth. And I'm looking in the mirror and I'm like, okay, I'm going to value my self-worth. And, I just sit there. I'm like, you're a goddess and you're beautiful and blah, blah, blah for 10 minutes straight. And I kid you not, the swelling disappeared. And so did the red rash. And I did look like a goddess in that moment. And I was like, wow, I can transform this in literally 10 minutes if I believe in myself. And so that's when it became like a powerful tool. But when like a symptom has been going on for a long time and I still haven't unpacked it, that's when it gets frustrating.
So I'm really curious, how did you learn or what made you realize that when your body goes into brain fog, when you're staring at the screen, that you could fix it by taking a walk in nature?
I guess I just didn't really know what else to do besides eat. So my first option was eat a meal and see if maybe I was just hungry. And when that didn't make it any better, I would go for walks and it would hit me sort of around after like lunchtime, like even right after I'd eaten. So I wasn't necessarily that eating was the solution. And it just started to lift as soon as I went for a walk. And it takes about 30 minutes for it to lift. So it does need to be a sizable walk. But yeah, it's just a bit of trial and error, really.
And experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
So for a listener who's sort of in that in-between stage of knowing that things are shifting and not really recognizing how these new signs, and it could be your body, it could be like, the practices that you mentioned in meditation or insights through journaling, you can unpack it just by experimenting and seeing what works.
Mm-hmm. I just love oracle cards and I can't really read them, but I find that if I need to know an answer to a question, like what is this acne doing on my neck, for example, I'll go and I'll pick a card and I'll see what it has to say. And that might give me a little bit more guidance.
Is the guidance coming from the card or is it coming from the meaning that you give the card and therefore the answer coming from you?
The meaning that I would associate with it, yeah.
And I sort of provoked you in a little bit in that way because when we were talking earlier, we talked about the difference between looking for answers outside of us and then drawing them from within. So what I heard you say is that the oracle cards are like a tool for you to draw that wisdom out of yourself.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I have struggled with being able to know what's coming from inside of me or what's coming from old me almost, or like me that needed to fit into society or do specific things. And that's, I think, why a lot of the times, instead of going to other people, I now just use like oracle cards or I journal or I do everything almost by myself before I take it to other people so that I can follow my instinct and learn how to listen to me without needing validation from someone else. Or if some outside person gives me a different response, knowing to trust myself.
I like that. So you're learning to trust yourself by using these tools that allow that self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious. How would you describe old Alexandra and Alexandra now?
Old Alexandra was a complainer, and she was very judgmental and had a very clear idea of what life should be like and how people should operate in that life. Very focused and driven and ambitious, and really wouldn't allow any sort of anything less than really high quality from relationships, from work, from anything. And yet she was a real people pleaser, and she spent a lot more time listening rather than speaking, and would do anything to make someone else feel comfortable. And so in that case, I would say the values were definitely conflicted in the sense that I knew exactly like the life that I wanted to build and visualize for myself, but I let those standards slip really when I was in those moments where like I needed to be loved or I needed to people please. And so now it's about realigning my values and making sure that I know the why behind everything that I do, and saying no to a lot of things that I really don't need to be doing or that don't bring me joy. I think the main thing now is like, if I'm not happy or if I'm not feeling good, then I know that it's not for me. And I basically over the past year or year and a half have gotten rid of the majority of my anxiety. I used to be highly anxious. Gotten rid of that. I've gotten rid of this feeling of hoping that everyone understands me and likes me and that I fit their mold. So, and I lead every day with like, I come first. Me as a person, I come first. And there really aren't any compromises to be made when you realize that you do come first. And once you've made that decision.
This could go in so many different ways. So I recognize that path, and I personally sort of had to fight against this idea that me coming first was selfish. When I got through that, life showed me, and I experienced so much beauty around the idea that when I'm not trying to fit in and I'm being myself and really kind of navigating down to the essence, no one is negotiating away anything. Everybody gets what they want. And that was never even a possibility before.
It's so true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because what I want is essentially what other people want too. If we think about we're all one and part of this larger community of we're all unified in some sort of thought. So what's best for me is also what's best for someone else.
That is essence.
Yeah.
I have a really practical example of that. Like my husband and I got to a point in our marriage where the hardest decision of the day was like where we were going to eat dinner. We got into a routine of like, it really became an issue. And because we hadn't navigated around the idea that what he wants is novelty, right? Different things. If he had Chinese for lunch, he's going to want something different for dinner. And what I wanted was the experience. Like, are we eating outside on the patio? Are we in a restaurant that's not crowded and noisy? And when we each identified what we really wanted and not asked ourselves the surface question, then we were able to give each other and have what we wanted without negotiating away anything. So that's like my example of the experience that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. How did you come to that realization?
Tears, pain, prayer.
Over fried chicken and...
Oh my God. Like, no, honest to God, it was really hard. Like having the difficult conversations and really just wanting to shift a pattern. And like, I remember one day we're parked in front of a restaurant and my husband's like, do you want to eat here? Like, that question is irrelevant because we're parked, right? You were supposed to ask me like before we physically get here and like are parked. And you know what? I think what that brings to light is that it's not the path to getting to that common. It's not pain free. Like it's not suffering, but it's not pain free because you're touching parts of yourself that you don't even know you're touching, right? Like, and it's a really simple decision. Where are we having dinner? What are we going to eat? You know what I mean? But again, it's a pattern that had been put in place and there was lots of stories around that. So I just brought up the conversation over and over and over and over again, which I'm sure was nauseating for my husband, but being married almost 30 years, he's probably like, we're going to get through this before we go anywhere else. So I'm in for the ride, right? You know, it's stupid to think, but I couldn't imagine like this cannot be the most difficult decision of my day. It just cannot. I'm not willing to accept that. So even when he asked to this day, where do you want to go eat? I'm like, you know, if we have takeout, that would be fine. So I'm still answering the question with what I want, which is the experience that I'm looking for, and not the question that he's asking himself, which is, how is this diverse? Where's the novelty in this? Interesting.
And I think what that brought up for me as well was like, you almost have to go through extremes, like extreme emotions of like someone's on this end of the spectrum and the other person's on the other side of the spectrum to really, what you're doing is really coming into a balance of what works for both of you.
Oh, you know what I just saw in the moment that you said that is like a vision of earth, dirt, right? And two things on top growing. And you have to actually go deeper to where the roots connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what I experienced, you know, connecting to our deeper roots rather than those surface questions. And if I had an answer to how that happens, that would be amazing. But I don't know.
Do you think the constant persistence of you asking all the time was the right thing? Or was there a point at which you backed off?
I have an issue with things being called right or wrong. I would say that a persistent attention to what I'm noticing in the moment was critical. Not remembering a story from yesterday or an experience from last year that might have made me mad, but what is happening in the moment. And actually, now that I'm actually remembering what would happen as I would move through, like, I'm about to ask this question. I need to be totally focused, completely grounded, and like paying attention to what my body's telling me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it creates an opening almost for a different experience to happen. Otherwise, we're playing rewind on our life. We're living the same day over and over again for 50 years. And I didn't want that to happen. So yes, the answer is yes and yes. Persistence and noticing in the moment what's happening without sort of being attached to it's just going to happen again. We're going to be in the parking lot. He's not going to really care what I think, you know, stories, right? Or that's what's happened before. It's a pretend question, you know, whatever was going on in the moment. But just allowing that opening in that space to say it can be different, like believing in that possibility almost.
Yes. And I'm wondering though, so I've been in this situation many times before, and, you know, I constantly think, okay, today's a new day. I've done the whole bit of forgiving, you know, I'm going to let the past be the past. And then the same situation reoccurs. I'm like, where is that shifting point really?
That's a good question. And what I would pose back, is it exactly the same situation? Is it exactly the same situation? Or is your brain culling your experience in order to make it easier on you? Because that's our brain's job. Like, we don't learn to get up and walk every day. We don't learn to feed ourselves every day because we learned it once and our body just does it by habit, right? So that's the question I would pose. As you are re-experiencing it, is it exactly the same experience? Or is it slowly, drip by drip, day by day, just so slightly changing that you don't even really can pinpoint the difference? But then one day, boom, you look at it and you're like, this one's different. Because if I think about the shift for that to happen between my husband and I in a long-term relationship with a really deeply embedded pattern, I don't know, like, I might be lying here because I don't know the time frame, but it was not immediate. It was at least 8 months, if not 16 months of drawing attention to this and knowing that if I notice and if I'm like here in this moment, something will eventually shift. Doing it over again and again, but letting it be new. Because I'll tell you, in the beginning stages of that, when I knew he was about to ask the question, my stomach would tense. My jaw would clench. I would already be like holding my head in my hand, like, here it comes. We're going to do it again. It's going to happen. You know?
I definitely know what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
So even in my posture, right? If my head is in my hand and I'm like shaking it like, oh God, no. You know? That is not as open as when I was like maybe later, months later, when I'm like, my chest is out, my head is relaxed. And I'm just kind of looking at him like, here it comes, you know?
Well, and it goes back to what I was saying before about like repetition is you finally master it at some point with these slight tweaks and in a similar situation playing over and over again until you've fine-tuned it to a bit new balance.
But I'm super curious about how you distinguished that there is no compassion in your own experience versus you knowing that and cultivating that and standing up for that in a work environment. Like, what's the difference there?
Probably because it's easy to zero in on other people's, what's right in front of you is so clear in another person. And essentially what they're doing is mirroring it back to you. And yet, I don't know. I guess I hold myself to a higher standard because I feel like I can do it.
Without the repetition?
Well, I don't want to do the repetition, that's for sure, but I need to.
Now that's the nut, Alexandra.
I know. I'm here and I'm like, shoot, I put myself in a real hole.
Then I'm not going to let you get out of.
Yeah. But that's what's so great too. It's like you can look at any situation in front of you that maybe a friend is going through or a parent or someone at work or a situation that you're dealing with at work. And it's actually reflecting back to you the things that you need to be working on in some capacity.
Yeah. Life is a mirror for sure. So as you're shifting and moving away from the idea that you can achieve perfection through hard work, tell me again what that's next. What are you moving towards?
Well, I don't really want to work for the rest of my life, I think. I think for me, the moment was like, okay, I want to be able to travel the world and have a family and work on passion projects. And I don't want to wait until I'm 65 to do it. And if I don't change things now, like life is going to pass me by, basically. So I need to do the hard part now and say no to things that I would have said yes to before. The hardest part has been realizing that I haven't been me for the majority of my life, like me, and recognizing that all of what's happening in my adult life is a result of what happened to me when I was a kid, and being able to reparent myself, but also know that my parents did absolutely everything perfectly. And I think for me, because I have such a good relationship with them and because we've been so close, it's been going off on my own and being who I need to be and not making them feel as though I'm rebelling or disappointing them or going against what they want. And for them to know that I'm making the right decisions for me and I'm still going to lead that successful life, but not necessarily the way they taught me to. That's been the hardest part, is that feeling of possibly disappointing them and not knowing if the choice that I have made to make this shift in my life is actually going to produce the success without their formula.
Without perfection and hard work.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you are like right in the liminal space. You're right in between. So what I heard you say just now is like, that that's the right thing, but you don't have complete faith in it. Or do you?
There's parts of me where I'm like completely sure that certain things are going to happen, but I'm still stuck in the how. And I know that I need to get into the like feel good feeling and just be laser focused. The whole thing of like, I just need to decide. And I keep avoiding making a decision. And that's what keeps me in this like limbo sometimes. And I just need to decide and not need confirmation all the time or deciding on the same thing over and over and over again when I don't get what I want in the time frame that I want it. I think it's the time frame that trips me up a lot because I know it's coming, but because it hasn't come in the time that I expected it to, that's when my faith starts to waver. So yeah, I think that what you originally said was there is some accuracy to that.
I have this little like slight grin that I like cannot suppress right now. So I have to be transparent about it. Because you and I, when you were interviewing me for your podcast, I talked about how long things take and how we are impatient for change, but that it is a slow process. I guess I'm asking myself right now, will that ever change? Like, is that part of our human design is to want things now and not allow them to unfold in their natural time?
I don't know, but there's some part of me that believes that they can happen quickly. I just need to get it into gear, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's only me that's not shifting into that gear.
What is that gear?
Probably just full trust and faith that whatever I've set out as a vision becomes the reality.
Within the time span that you want.
I don't even know that I set a time span. I think I need to be a lot more clear with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that I think is interesting about the life that we're living in Western culture right now is 100 years ago, our life expectancy was, mid 40s. And now our life expectancy is late 80s, early 90s, because of the advances in technology and food production and so on and so forth, and health and medical. So this idea that you have to wait to have what you want until at least 65 is crazy.
Right. It is crazy.
And that you can have it right now, but maybe in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So was that the recognition that led you to make a choice? I don't want to wait till I'm 65 to do what I want. I want to do what I want now. Or was it something else?
It probably was that. Yeah. There's been a lot that's happened in my short career. But when I first started my career, I was working 6 days a week, 8:30 to 7 o'clock at night. And this was for a startup. And then on top of that, events and stuff. At that moment, I realized, wait a second, I don't think that I want this for the rest of my life. And so it's been a gradual unfolding. And I think recently it was just this real want to be free and to do the things that really fill me up, because I've spent a lot of time being sick. And I hit this high or this blissful moment. And I have since been chasing that moment, essentially, because I know it's possible.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to when you talked about getting rid of the anxiety and getting rid of the idea that everyone needed to like you and the idea that you needed to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
What, if there's someone listening right now that wants those same things for themselves, what kind of advice or guidance or what insights would you share with them about your own experience that helped you move away from that?
Get into a relationship. For me, that personal experience was really coming face to face with someone who was my direct mirror and who I could not control in any sort of capacity. So for me, it was unique in that I found someone who I couldn't control at all. And then I needed to change in order to find that happiness. I think I would tell people to really know their worth and to put themselves first. And yet, unless you experience it for yourself, you don't know. That's great in theory, and I can talk about it all the time. I'm very well versed in being confident and knowing what I deserve. And yet when it comes into practice, I wasn't good at it. So I do think that you do need to go through it on your own. I don't know that there's necessarily a fast track. I can find coping mechanisms and I can pinpoint different things that have helped me along the way. But I think you actually need to go through the experience of the imbalance.
Well, and you said two things that are kind of in my mind conflicting. Because one thing you said was on your own, but then you really started with it happens in relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Help me connect those two.
So I was motivated by this other person to be better and to find this happier state of being. So I did need this person to show that to me.
Mm-hmm.
But when that person was no longer in my life, it was the motivation all of a sudden went away, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I could be my own motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And that I really did need to be my own motivation. And that in the whole grand scheme of things, nothing was about this other person. It was about me. And it was about trusting my inner me. So working with inner me, I guess, as a relationship.
You know what you just made me realize, and I know this, but we remember things over and over again, right? When you were interviewing me for your podcast and you asked me what my shift was or what changed, what you just said is exactly what I remember, but I verbalized it differently then. But now with you saying that, I remember that in that moment, I was my husband has to change. He has to change in order for me to be happy. But when I twisted that attention towards myself and recognized that, no, I'm the only one that can make myself happy. That's when I started to do the real work and not the surface level work, like the pretending. It was like until I accepted responsibility for shifting my own reality and aligning myself is when things really started to shift. But that relationship, like you said, was a mirror to what I wanted to change within myself.
Mm-hmm. And it was hard. It was so hard. It was really hard.
I can say the same thing. Like there's two things I think that in our conversation we really, and they're not like positive, feel good, easy things, right? One, it's going to take a lot of time. And two, it's going to be super hard.
Yeah. Well, and I was watching Jada Pinkett Smith's Red Table talk. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but she's obviously been through a very similar experience with Will. And she was like, it's hard. And she was talking to this guy who's looking for a relationship. And she was like, it's really, really, really tough. And he was like, why do you do it? Like, this sounds horrific. And she's like, well, because it's super worth it. And I think there's this knowing in me that I know that it's super worth it. And I guess to say is like, I really needed to learn the concept of unconditional love. And that was not something I really knew. I think I've said before, like my parents were very clear that they loved me and, I adored them. I really idolized my parents. But I think I was missing that unconditional love piece, at least in my brain. And loving someone even when it doesn't suit me, really, and allowing them to be who they are and not forcing them to do what it is that I think is best. And that was tough.
And it's fascinating too. I mean, it was tough, but it's also fascinating because allowing them to be who they are, and tell me where I'm wrong, allowed you to be more of who you are.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think if I would have to do it over, I would. Like, this has been the best thing that could ever have happened to me. But it's hard to explain to other people as well.
Yeah, it's hard to explain because what you and I talked about is that this is happening to lots of people and they feel like they're alone in the process, and they're not. They're not the only ones going through it. Mm-hmm. How can we accompany each other on this journey is my question to you.
I think for me, it's less about offering advice. I think I realized advice is really not the way to go. And just sitting there and understanding someone, really seeking to understand someone and not to project. I think that would have really helped me along this way. And one of the reasons why I didn't really talk about this with a lot of people was because I found that their advice was a projection of their own experiences onto me. Because I, in particular, had to figure out how to listen to myself. What I really needed was someone who would just sit there and listen to me, but then also be expansive, like an expansive person who doesn't judge you, but who pulls out the best side of you, or who knows how to pull out what you should focus on.
Was this a relationship or a community or a space that you had before, or that you stepped into and had to cultivate?
It was something that I had to step into. Yeah.
How'd you do that?
I think the alt MBA really helped me to see that. So this course that I recently took, of the idea of how, like, I've lost a lot of friends along the way. And as I'm repopulating this particular portion of my life, that these are the people that I really need to focus on. And I am attracting more of those people just naturally, and allowing those friends that don't really fall into this category to fall away and to know that everything is absolutely fine.
Do you think the experience would have happened without the alt MBA? I'll add a link in the show notes to the alt MBA so you can learn more about it. It's Seth Godin's signature or anchor offering, a 4-week intensive for leaders that are ready to level up. But my question to you, Alexandra, is do you think it would have happened without alt MBA?
No, the alt MBA for me was a calling. It was something that I listened to and I was like, this is it. And I knew that it was right, and I couldn't explain why it was right. And I didn't know what it would bring me, but I knew that I would get a lot from it. And for me, it was really expansive people and direction into where I want to go next, and an accountability partner. And that was a real piece that I was missing. Someone who would really help me to achieve that next level. And a stranger. I think a stranger was really an important piece to this, because they didn't have any preconceived notions of me and who I was. And I could speak just very openly and honestly.
And you could speak into being almost the new Alexandra.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
That is interesting that it had to be a stranger. I've never heard that, but I can totally resonate with that because new people don't have those constraints on you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you said that is also resonates with my own experience is this pruning of relationships. You lose a lot of relationships as you lose your old identity, but then you gain new relationships as you're stepping into your new identity. For someone who is in the middle of losing those relationships and kind of getting freaked out about it, what would you share with them about your experience? Because I know when I was going through it, I was scared, right? I was really afraid because some of those relationships weren't just friends, they were actual like family members. But I knew that there had to be distance between us in order for me to grow into who I needed to be. But it didn't feel good. How did you navigate that transition?
I think I just realized that we were at very different places, and, you know, family is family. And I just my family is so close knit that I knew that even if I was disappointing someone, somehow, some way it would come back together. And I think for the friends that I did lose, a lot of this has also been like a detachment piece for me, and detaching from the outcome of like, have I lost them? Like, I don't really think of it like that almost. I just think of it as like, this is just a phase that we're going through. And if they're meant to be in my life again, they will be. And at that time, it'll be perfect for us. But for me, my happiness became more important than the people around me, really.
Well, not the people, but fitting into what the people wanted from you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I found that I had to be really frank with a friend just a few weeks ago of mine. And I said, you know, I know that you're going through your own stuff, but that doesn't mean that you can screw me around. And I was very frank, and I said it in a really nice way. And he didn't respond for a few weeks. And I was completely detached and okay with that, because I just knew that when the time was right, we would talk again and we would be normal. And that's exactly how it played out. So I think too, it's like envisioning that, you know, having that positive outcome in mind is a real part of the process.
Totally. That is spot on. Thank you for bringing that up, because you and I talked about that. But even believing that there is that possibility and not having this sort of doom and dread outlook when anything changes is important, is what I hear you saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, if you want something to turn out well, you have to envision that it will turn out that way.
What would you say to someone who doesn't know how to envision, can't imagine, or doesn't feel like they can even see a good possibility out of it right now?
Yeah, it's funny that you ask me that, because some person is particularly coming into mind. And for me, I was like, I can't even fathom how you don't imagine. I've always had a really like vivid imagination, maybe because I'm an only child and I had to entertain myself. But I would say do things that excite you and do new things. Like really challenge yourself to go out and do new things, because what you're really looking for, I think, is not novelty, but something that will inspire that creativity. And if you're constantly doing the mundane, everyday stuff, that's when you get stuck. And when you're stuck in your own worldview almost.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. Well, there's one thing that I want to point out here, though, because I think in our society, we also have this idea that only $1 million moments can make things happen, that it can't happen in our day to day. So like, yes, there's that new and different experience that you put yourself into. But if you're not ready to do that, maybe it's like, you know, putting on a different shoe first, or brushing your teeth with a different hand, or changing your routine in the morning, like slightly, or walking to the car a different way. So what I think that we're both saying is something has to change in order for it to shift.
Mm-hmm. And you're going about, I avoid the step-by-step process. And this is part of my problem is, you know, I want to achieve perfection, and yet I'm not really willing to go through the step-by-step. And so you took it down to something as simple as changing your hairstyle, you know, doing stuff like that. That can be super exciting. And I went for an extreme, which I think was really interesting.
Because you have the mindset of go big or go home.
Yeah.
Say more about that, because I know some people that way.
I think it's the things where I set that go big or go home that actually came to be. And that's why I believe it's true. So as an example, no one believed me when I said I'm moving to London after I graduate from college. And they were all like, yeah, blah, blah. And I knew there was no other outcome for me. Like, that was just a knowing. And so I made it happen. Somehow it happened. And I don't know. I don't believe that I'm here to play small. There's something inside that just says you're not here to play small. And I think part of why things have been so hard is because it's getting me ready for something much bigger that I can, if I don't go through these bits right now, this step by step now, and handle it and be able to expand my capacity or my stress levels or whatever that might look like, then I won't be ready for what that bigger picture is.
That's resonating. I know exactly what you mean by that. As I'm working through writing my book, this piece of nonfiction, because it's true, as true as I can get it, I'm not giving birth to the book. The book is giving birth to a new me. Like the process of writing these stories and sharing them in detail is moving me through what I need in order to go to the next level of whatever being or thing is coming up for me. So I resonate with what you're saying.
Can you talk more about that birthing process? And I ask because over the last year, it's felt like I've never given birth in my life, but it's felt multiple times like my womb is falling out of me. And I wonder if this is something that just I personally go through, or if multiple people go through as they go through these cyclical, I guess, I don't know. To me, they feel like deaths and rebirths.
They are deaths and rebirths. Absolutely, they're deaths and rebirths. But I think one of the things that's significant in the way that I traveled through these deaths and rebirths now that is different from my origin story, right? The dark period and, this mess that I found myself in way back when that I talk about is that back then I tried to do it on my own. And what I recognize now, like even in birthing, like the idea of a midwife, because when you think of a midwife in every sense of the word, it is someone who has been or will be in the same experience. It's like helping each other through this death and rebirth, this walking through a different door, right? Like the words that you used where it's a stranger. You don't have to know this person, but they have to know what you went through or what you want to go through and be willing to help you move in that direction, provide some accountability, and believe that that is even possible. Like you use the word expansive. So going back to saying more about that birthing, like I think this experience that we're talking about happens over and over again in different ways because it's teaching us. Like I have gone through experiences, both big and small, that have taught me and I know better, but it doesn't mean that I don't have to relearn it as I'm writing the book, right? So I went through my own. It has to be perfect and it will be hard and it's going to be painful. But now I'm turning that around. Like I'm putting it inside out and saying, no, it's giving birth to me. It's helping me grow and develop like a baby in a womb, right? And I'm going to come out a new being. I don't know how we just start there, right? Or how we keep ourselves in that flow or in that movement, which is why I'm having these conversations, right? Because this liminal space in between that I am now and what I'm birthing or what is being birthed through me to be next is such a mystery. How does it happen? What do we do to make it easier and not hard? Did I even answer your question? I feel like I went on a little riff there.
No, you did. I think it was a very similar way to phrasing of what I said of like, this moment is just preparing you for the next stage almost.
Yeah. So when you said that the Alt MBA helped you see, how did it help you see?
I think because I was constantly surrounded by strangers every week talking about really deep subjects. And I had to go and I had to ship a project off pretty much every single day of the week for 1 month straight. It really made me see my own potential, and being in a community where everyone had the same vision but different goals made me realize that I need to replicate that in my own life. And if I don't step up the quality of people I'm surrounding myself with, I'm going to stay where I'm at.
And it comes back to relationship again. And I love that because I want to sort of hit home the idea and the experience that we both have, and I think we both sort of advocate and stand behind, is that it is in relationship that we are midwifed, right? I mean, a midwife is another person, and anyone that's moving through a liminal space between what's now and what's next, I guess you're not going to move through it alone. Like, you can use tools like the tools you mentioned and the tools that I advocate and that we do and that I promote sort of in my own community, like meditation and journaling and, those kinds of things that are self-reflective. But that only shines, like that light is a little dim. Like, you really need humans to help midwife you, to help you step into that possibility. Like, it won't happen alone. Or maybe it will, it'll just be slower.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You just reminded me of that quote. What is it? I'm sure you've heard it and I'm going to totally not say it correctly, but it was like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, or something like that.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah. But we want to go fast and we have to do it together, even though it slows us down.
Well, I mean, in my own personal experience, had I not been pushed into that situation with someone else, I grew so fast in a year. And when that person was then no longer there, I was like dropped out of the sky almost. I was like, well, what do I do now? And I kind of had to find that community within myself a little bit and then a new community. So
beautiful. What are you curious about these days?
That's a fun question. And one I apparently don't have an answer to, even though I'm constantly curious. I guess I'm curious about this is it. Like, I have all these questions all the time. And then if I have all the answers too. So the thing that came to mind was, what do you do when you feel stuck? Like, sometimes I feel like I'm in a holding pattern or I'm in a waiting pattern. And the answer is, I'm just waiting on myself. I'm just the one keeping myself stuck. So I'm actually not sure how to answer that right now.
And I think that's beautiful. I think that's okay. So what I want to mirror back to you is, and you're giggling. Why are you giggling, Alexandra?
I'm giggling because I'm thinking about how I like to answer all the questions myself.
Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah. And this is it too, is like, I need to find the value. And because I always do find the value in allowing someone else to, I think, almost give me the answer instead of me doing it myself sometimes.
Or sitting in the question until you know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Letting it be more about, what question am I asking, so that I can notice the answers when they show up.
Yeah, very true.
And this kind of wraps me back around to the posture that we're in and that we're talking about here and within you, is this exploration of this liminal space, this in between, the mystery of this muckiness of what you said is, and I'm looking for my notes, the me now and the old me and the me that you're becoming. Pretty intensive transformations, pretty significant shifts that have to take you from old Alexandra into new Alexandra, right?
Yeah, definitely. So what advice do you have for me?
I don't have any advice for you, but what I do want to sort of wrap up for both you and for the listener is that there's a couple of things that are common between your experience and mine. And one of the things that I heard you say, and that I also experienced, is that I thought that I needed to move through this alone, but I recognized that I needed to do it in community. And it was easier for me to do it with people that I didn't know, so that I could grow into and sort of affirm and envision that new way of being, because the people that were closest to me maybe couldn't, not that they couldn't, but that it was easier for a stranger to do it, like a coach or a mentor or, a community, a school or something, right? There's a container that you have to step into that allows you to expand into that new way of being. So that's something distinct. Like, it happens together, not alone, right? It happens in relationship, not by yourself. The second thing that both you mentioned and I know that I say over and over and over again is, like, allow yourself to let it happen, like in the time that is going to happen. Like my initial transformation was 7 years. Maybe this transformation that I'm moving through with the book will only take 1 year, right? But just having a different relationship with time than maybe the one that we did before. Because I know that I was racing against the clock the first 40 years of my life, and I don't anymore. I'm not racing against the clock. So those are the two main things, I think.
How do you make that shift to not race against the clock?
The same way that you're making it, or that you shared that you're making it. Thank you for that question. What I heard you say and what really was beautiful about your story is that you're trusting that if you can step away from the clock and be in relationship with your body, move out of that context, right? Take a walk, even if it takes 30 minutes. What I heard you say, tell me where I'm wrong, is that you're still coming back to that work and getting it done on time. It's just happening a different way. And you have to remember, and your body is reteaching you that, no, Alexandra, this isn't the way that we do it anymore. You're not going to sit here for 10 or 12 hours and hammer this out and do it the hard way. Like, go take a walk and come back. Is what I heard in your experience.
Yeah.
And what I know in my experience and the experience that I teach in my community is that you change your relationship with time so that you can build a relationship with your own energy, like your own cycles, like your own rhythms, the dance within your own life that you might not have even seen playing out. So I think that we'll all learn to trust ourselves more in different ways. We just have to be open to noticing what it is that life is teaching us and showing us and mirroring to us. And you're learning to trust yourself more by building that relationship with your body. And you're seeing the evidence of it. I mean, if you're looking at yourself, I mean, if your eyes are going from swollen to not swollen because you're like loving on yourself in the mirror, what the heck?
Like, I'm not even joking. Like, that was so crazy.
I believe you. But the thing is, and this is another shift that I've moved through in my life that I haven't really talked about, that I hope to talk more about and be more open in like publicly open about it, is that it's not crazy, right? There's science to back it up. There's evidence to back it up, but it's not crazy. Like, I used to think some things were creepy, and then I would be, oh, wait, but they could be cool. And now I'm like, this is just freaking amazing in the way it is. But it does go against the air quotes of normal culture of this society in how you move through the world. And it takes a way of seeing that's different than fitting in. And that's one of the biggest things. That's another thing that you and I had in common, is I also had to get to a space where it wasn't about me fitting into the box. It was about me finding what box I belonged in.
Or not fitting into the box at all.
Yeah. Who says it's a box? It's a freaking playground. Awesome.
Yeah.
It has been absolutely delightful to talk to you and to be in conversation with you about the liminal space as you're moving through it, because I know that this took a lot of courage. The exploration of not knowing in mystery, like in the middle of shift, is, I think it's a sacred time, and it's a time that we need to talk more about. So thank you for joining me today on the Within You podcast. And again, I'm with Alexandra Kalino, the host of the What If podcast.